Will democracy survive in the next couple of years?
And essentially, we are the same.
And there are so many needs that Minnesota has.
What people are saying they need right now.
Access to democracy is made possible by donations from the following organizations. Thomson Reuters, a global company with expertise and insight to unravel complex situations in the areas of law, tax, compliance, government, and media. Their worldwide network of journalists and editors keep customers up to speed on relevant global events. Thomson Reuters, the Answer Company. Crutchfield Dermatology, a full-service treatment center in Medi-Spa in Eagan. Their goal is to help you look good and feel great with beautiful skin. With service built around courtesy, dignity, and respect, Mayo-trained Dr. Charles Crutchfield personally treats each patient and is acknowledged as one of the nation's best physicians. Firefly Credit Union, with locations throughout the Twin Cities, has proudly served Minnesotans since 1925. Firefly guides its members forward by delivering customized financial solutions to improve their lives in all aspects of banking. Firefly Credit Union, they light the way with life illuminated. Edina Eye, Physicians and Surgeons, a division of Twin Cities Eye Consultants, has proudly served the Twin Cities for more than 55 years. Now in 7 convenient locations. Using the most advanced technology combined with human touch, Edina Eye offers comprehensive services but dedicated specialists committed to excellence with innovative procedures and expertise for the most advanced eye care.
Welcome to Access to Democracy. Alan Miller with you as usual, and far too long to have this guest return. John Gordon, the Executive Director of the Minnesota Civil Liberties Union, of the American Civil Liberties Union. John, welcome back.
Thanks so much, Alan. What a pleasure to be here.
It has been a bizarre 2020, certainly time and a half for you people in the Civil Liberties Union, and I don't know where to start. Why don't we start, since it's been a couple of years since you've been on, by telling people why does every person deserve representation?
That's one of the keystones of the beliefs of the ACLU, and I think everybody who believes in the rule of law. We've seen an example of what happens when order breaks down and when people are animated by whatever series of bizarre beliefs that they may have, and they think the rules don't apply to them. And so I think one of the things that we've learned over the past weeks and months, and frankly, years, is how important it is for everybody to be able to both understand the law, to be able to have access to the legal system, and to get a fair shake.
To me, the legal system and protecting civil liberties is a cornerstone of our democracy. I don't think that there's anybody who can argue with that. The ACLU does not charge fees. So that's another thing that people have to understand. But how does the ACLU determine what cases to get involved in and what cases to pass on?
What we've got at the ACLU, both here in Minnesota and nationally, is a set of priorities, a set of focuses that we pay particular attention to. We could have an innumerable number of lawyers and others, folks working on activities, and we'd still never get it all done. So we've got 3 major kinds of activities that we have. One is community engagement, community organizing. 2 is legislative and lobbying, and 3 is litigation. So in Minnesota, we have tripled the size of our legal department over the last few years, and we are focused on racial justice. We are focused on immigration and border issues. We are focused on smart justice and attempting to reduce the incarcerated population in this country by 50%. And we are focused, as we have been since our beginning 100 years ago, on the Bill of Rights and the guarantees of the Constitution.
And we're going to get into some of those recent cases because you have been involved in really a plethora of really interesting and important cases, particularly over the last year or so. But I wanted to mention that Canada has classified the Proud Boys as a terrorist organization. Now, I remember back, and of course I can go back a long way, when the Nazis wanted to march in Skokie, Illinois, and they didn't get a permit, and the ACLU came in their behalf of the neo-Nazis and made sure that they had a permit to march. Now, we have some really right-wing radical groups like the Proud Boys, like the Oath Keepers, like the Three Percenters. Might the ACLU end up representing them in a case that involves civil liberties?
I'm glad you brought that up, Alan, because the Skokie case was really a defining moment for the ACLU. It really exemplifies that we protect people's rights without necessarily agreeing with what their program is or what their beliefs are, because government regulation of speech needs to be content neutral, is the phrase. That is, everybody ought to be treated fairly, regardless of what the content of their speech is. That, however, does not mean that people cannot be prevented from threatening other people. It doesn't mean that they can't be prevented from brandishing weapons in a threatening way. And it certainly doesn't mean that they can't be prevented from taking over a building like the United States Capitol in an attempt to prevent the mechanism of democracy from working. So in that case many years ago in Skokie, there was not a danger of violence. There was not a danger of people getting hurt. It was, I will just say this, a pretty ragtag group of folks who were being discriminated against because of the content of their viewpoints. And what we're looking at now in all these headlines is groups of people who are really trying to literally bring down the government and do it in a violent way. And that is not protected by the First Amendment, period, full stop.
And even in Washington, even though these groups were given a permit to parade, they went far beyond that. And I'm not talking about the actual insurrection and the attack on the government, the seat of our government, but they exceeded the permission of their parade route. In fact, we're going to have a trial as to whether they were egged on by the President of the United States, the then president, or not. But assuming that a group like the Oath Keepers decided to have participation in the, let's say the St. Patrick's Day parade here, and they were denied, and all they wanted to do was parade, would you be coming forward to defend them?
We look at a lot of different factors in trying to figure out where we put our limited resources. One of the things that we try to do is to make sure that we are on the side of people who don't have the resources to protect themselves, who are being picked on by unfairly by entities with a lot more resources. One of the things we know about the mob in Washington is that the rallies that preceded that were bankrolled by billionaires. The fact is, in those kinds of situations, I don't have a lot of interest in getting involved in those. They don't need us, frankly. It's the people who are under-resourced, who are traditionally picked on by the government, whether that's BIPOC people, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, or whether it's poor people, and we're involved very heavily in trying to avoid the criminalization of poverty, or whether it's LGBTQ citizens and folks who are having their rights trampled on by government entities. That's what we're interested in. And those are the kinds of cases that we get involved in. Do we represent people whose political views disagree with ours? Absolutely. Do we disagree? Do we represent people who are carrying weapons and brandishing them and threatening other people? Not on my watch, we don't.
And I think that that's really what goes to the very foundations of our Constitution and our Bill of Rights. And I can't imagine anybody who would describe it better than you just did. Now, one of the things you just mentioned was a criminalization of poverty. What do you mean by that?
There are an awful, Anatole France, I think it was, said, the law in its infinite majesty and wisdom forbids the rich as well as the poor from sleeping under bridges. Meaning, there are a lot of crimes that are basically crimes of being poor. And we see that in the sweeps of the parks that the park board and the city have in Minneapolis have been doing, and people whose belongings have been destroyed, sometimes their identification papers, their family papers, their personal things have all been bulldozed away in cases. We are involved in that litigation, and we are trying to protect the rights of people to simply survive when there's no other alternative available for them. And so that's an example. Another example is the tremendous burden of fines and fees on people in Minnesota, regardless of what the fine or the punishment for the offense is. There are often surcharges, $78 surcharges very frequently. And even when judges try to waive those surcharges because they know the person can't pay it, it's a very difficult job for them to do that. And so another example is cash bail. You see that people with wealth and resources walk out of jail the next day pending trial, as very frequently they should be doing. But somebody who can't put up $1,000 or $500 or $100 or $50, literally, people are sitting in jail because they can't come up with $50 to pay the fee on a bond of $500. That is the criminalization of poverty. And there are other examples, of course.
And for instance, a person who has a traffic ticket doesn't show up in court. There's a warrant issued, and suddenly that person gets stopped because they had a defective tail light. So now that person is thrown into the system, and when he goes before a judge, the judge says, "Oh, you ignored a warrant, and now you have another charge, $500 bail." That might be the difference between whether that person's family can eat that week or not. And that was really a good example of it.
That's a perfect example. And part of the cure for these things is litigation, but part of it is just better management. One of the things that we've seen is that jurisdictions that have a practice of sending out reminders to people, either text reminders or email reminders. It is not perfect because there are a lot of people without access to reliable internet and without access to reliable communication services at all. But they really can reduce the number of people that get into trouble simply by sending out emails to remind people and finding other ways to remind people, family members and this sort of thing. I know if I get a magazine subscription that I drop, I don't know about you, Alan, but it's like my email inbox fills up. Have you forgotten? Don't forget about us here. Like we're still here. It seems to me that if the penalty is throwing people in jail and fining them, that would be the very least we could do, huh?
I certainly think so. Another thing I know that you've been very involved in, and I also wanted to talk about all the people who are in jail on superficial charges, who shouldn't be in jail, where they got convicted years ago, perhaps on a marijuana charge, which is now being legalized every place you turn around. Attempts to get those people out to save money. It's so expensive to keep them incarcerated. For what? For a non-violent marijuana crime, things like that. And I know you also get involved in trying to stop executions. So, well, let's talk about that a little bit.
You've given me a lot here, so let me take a couple of swing. Can I take a swing at a couple of those?
Absolutely.
Let me take a swing at marijuana legalization for one thing. It is a topic that is going to be a hot topic in the legislative session that just started remotely, and there is a lot of debate about how serious a drug problem marijuana is. And I don't claim to be the world's expert on that. I will acknowledge that there are people on both sides of that question. But even if you think that it's that it presents a danger to people, you really have to weigh the dangers that are created by that with the dangers that are created by failing to legalize it, and the racial inequities that are inherent in the system. There is no evidence that Black people and white people use marijuana at materially different rates, but you are 9 to 11 times more likely to suffer criminal consequences if you're a Black, Indigenous, or person of color, particularly Black, than you are if you're white. It is a tool of white supremacy, really, and I know people pull back from that term, but it is a facially neutral term that is a huge driver of racial inequities, and it really, we are hopeful that in the Minnesota legislature we're going to be able to put a stop to that. The other issue you raised in particular was prison reform and shortening of sentences. It is an interesting issue because after the ACLU and other advocates have been working on this for decades and decades, finally, there are people on all sides of the political spectrum who have gotten interested in this for different reasons. I will grant you, there are some people who see it as purely a fiscal issue, but whatever your motivations for it are, there are an awful lot of people who are rethinking the length and the ubiquity, the universality of stiff incarceration rates for crimes of all sorts, because they destroy families, they destroy communities, they destroy our way of life for lots of people.
And another area that I wanted to touch on also is facial recognition. I know the ACLU has been very involved in trying to stop this facial recognition, which has proved to be very, very ineffective. People have ended up in jail based on facial recognition, where the proof is that they were no place near the spot of the crime. So I know you have spent time on that. Where is that in Minnesota?
There are two things going on. Number one, we are very hopeful that the city of Minneapolis is going to join the growing list of cities that forbid the use of facial recognition technology in connection with the criminal justice system. So it raises three issues. One is its general lack of reliability. And there have been, the ACLU did some testing and some experimentation, and it turns out that facial recognition technology, so-called, identified a number of members of Congress, largely people of color, as criminals, when in fact it wasn't true at all. It was just completely false and completely inaccurate. So one is the general lack of reliability. Two is the, again, huge differences between Black people and white people, and the as unfair and unreliable as it is to reuse on anybody, it is doubly and triply and quadruply so with respect to people of color. The other issue with facial technology, and forgive me if I get a tiny bit philosophical, I promise it won't last long, and that is the question of what is our interest in staying anonymous when we're out in public? How do you feel about private companies and government entities knowing where you are all the time? Now, now somebody might say, well, if I'm not doing anything wrong, what do I have to worry about? But if you think about what it means for Google and Facebook and the city of Minneapolis and the FBI and immigrations and customs enforcement to be able to follow you down the street electronically and know where you are. People throw around the term Orwellian because of George Orwell in 1984, but it really tends to eliminate what I think a lot of people value in this country on all sides of the political spectrum is independence from the government. You are not the same as the government. There's a crisp dividing line, or there should be. And facial recognition technology really blurs that and makes you an appendage of the government. I know that sounds like an exaggeration, but if you think about it, it's really true.
No, I think the intrusion into your personal life is something that now that you brought it up, for instance, I was in a particular retail establishment 2 days ago, and yesterday on my phone, I got a message, how is your experience at XYZ store? Well, I don't know that it was necessary or even appropriate for them to be following me in XYZ store, but I know that that technology is available on your phone, and it is an intrusion in our privacy. And so far as facial recognition showing up, some members of Congress, there are some Caucasian members of Congress right now that I think I would be happy to have show up as criminals, just based on the way they ignore the civil rights of others at the moment and protect the people who are out to damage our democracy. But that's a political issue, and I know you don't get into political issues.
But we don't, you'd agree we don't need facial recognition technology for that, right?
No.
I won't tell you what kind of ads I get, but let's suffice it to say they're not for little red sports cars. That's all I can tell you.
For sure.
The technology is actually even more intrusive than that. There is technology when you're in a store that captures your image, your face, and determines how you are reacting to the displays and the signs that you are seeing. Are you happier in aisle 3 and less interested in aisle 4? So they don't need to send you a questionnaire to figure that out. They are reading your face to determine that, and they don't even need your face to determine who you are. There are substantial advances being made in what's referred to as gait technology. Gait meaning not a gate in a fence, but gait in terms of how you walk, because every one of us walks. I don't know about you, Alan, I don't think about this all that often. Every one of us walks in kind of a different way, some more distinctive than others, but there are computer programs and technology to identify you and track you through downtown or anywhere else based on the manner in which you walk.
Yeah, and since I broke my femur 2 years ago, I guarantee you I am walking in a different way than I did previously, and it certainly would be recognizable. One of the good things about my face is that I get letters from companies saying your face broke our camera, and they want reimbursement. So that's a good thing. But no, in all seriousness, the intrusion on our private lives is really frightening. And there's so much more I want to talk to you about. We're down to 5 minutes already, but let's talk about community policing, which is a big issue here in Minnesota because of the George Floyd murder.
Right. The issue is a difficult one, and it is very emotional for people, and understandably so. The fact is that over the years, both because of the availability of excess military technology that has been pushed onto local police departments and training, such as the warrior training that has been used in a number of different police departments and by a number of different law enforcement officers on their own too. There's been very much of a battleground mentality and very much of a fear-based attitude that has become common. What we've tried to do at the ACLU is to make sure that there are enough resources for experts in different areas, including mental health, family, children, and so every call for help to the government doesn't necessarily need an armed response.
And a lot of times, people with mental problems end up being victims because they get violent with the police, where they don't have a mental health expert or a social worker with them. I mean, the police, and they don't handle it properly. Not their fault in that case.
It's complicated. It is a very complicated issue, and anybody who's got anyone in their family with mental health issues, or their friends or their circle of acquaintances, knows how difficult it is. But we really need to reduce the level of violence in our society. I'd love to see us reduce the incidence of weaponry. I mean, one of the things that's feeding this is that there are so many weapons out there. January of this year, more than 2 million new applications for weapons permits. It is not healthy, and it is dangerous to have all these weapons out there and accessible to people. And much of that accessibility leads not so much to homicides, but also to suicides in a very major way.
Only 400 million weapons in existence in the country now for 330 million people. So, I mean, there are some people who might say that's a little excessive.
And it tends to be very concentrated. It tends to be very concentrated. People in a lot of communities tend to have huge numbers.
Now, we are coming up on actually the last minute that we have, and I have so much more to discuss with you. So it just happens that Congresswoman Craig had to cancel on, I've never done this before, on 1 o'clock on the 12th of March. Are you available at that time to finish this discussion?
For you, almost certainly. I've never been asked this live before.
I've never done it live before.
All right. The answer is I will make that happen. I would love to make that happen.
March 12th, 1 o'clock, and we will continue with the Minnesota Civil Liberties Union. John Gordon, the executive director. John, I want to thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I have a whole litany of bullet points that I want to cover. And one of the things I'm criticized for is bringing up large issues in the last few seconds of an interview. So this will give us an opportunity to go forward. I want to thank you so much, and we'll see you in March.
Thank you so much, Alan, to you and your whole crew and your team. Thank you.
Thank you.